Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the Thriving Kids podcast from the Child Mind Institute. I'm Dr. Dave Anderson, and today we're doing something a little different. The episode you're about to hear is a live recording from a recent event I joined alongside Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist, NYU professor, and author of The Anxious Generation. We talked about what's happening to kids in this digital age, how smartphones, social media, and constant connectivity are shaping childhood, and what we can do about it. Now, John and I agree on a lot. Kids are struggling, tech plays a role, and the platforms need serious reform. But we also come at this from different angles. John's pushing for change, like smartphone bans before high school. I come at it from the clinical side, working every day with families trying to help their kids thrive in the world we actually live in with all its messy reality. You'll hear some of that in the conversation, and I think it's a good thing. Honest dialogue is how we make progress. Huge thanks to Guildhall and the Hamptons Institute for hosting this event and creating a space for an open, public conversation about kids, mental health, and tech. And special thanks to journalist and filmmaker Perry Peltz for moderating the discussion with insight, clarity, and compassion. These aren't always easy conversations to have, and we're grateful to everyone who made it possible. And thank you for listening, whether you're at home, in the car, or sneaking in one last beach day before fall.
What is a post-play childhood?
Well, first, thanks so much, Perry and Dave and Guildhall and Hamptons Institute. My wife and I bought a house near Sag Harbor 2 years ago, so this is the beginning of our third summer out here. So we're very pleased to meet the fellow residents and enjoy the intellectual offerings of the Hamptons in the summer. The title refers to the fact that something really changed in the early 2010s. I've been a professor since the 1990s. All of us who are working with kids, almost everybody has seen a big change happened in the early 2010s, early to mid 2010s. And my first book, The Coddling the American Mind, was an attempt to figure that out. Why are college students so different in 2015 than they were in 2012? So much more anxious, fragile. And in that book, at that time, we didn't have evidence about social media being a cause, but it was clear that overprotection is a cause. Human children need to play a lot. They need a lot of independence. And so we documented in that book, written with Greg Lukianoff, the decline of play, the rise of overprotection, especially in the 90s. All the older people here, we all had the same experience of after school or on weekends, you're out with your friends. And then, either you come home when the streetlights come on or you come home at a certain time. But we were all off having adventures, and sometimes it went badly, and you learned a lot from that. But by the late 90s, that had kind of ended, and certainly by the 2000s, that had ended. And now kids are always supervised, and they largely, either they're in adult supervised activities or they come home. And they're playing video games or they're watching porn or whatever it is they're doing, but they're on screens, 8 to 10 hours a day outside of school. That doesn't count school. So to answer your question, a post-play childhood is kind of like a post-water planthood. Like imagine that we decided, let's stop giving water to our plants. Let's just give them salt.
I do that sometimes.
Okay. When they misbehave? Yeah. And plants evolved to need a lot of water, and you can't grow them without that. And human children, all mammals, need a lot of play. If you've ever had a puppy or a kitten, they have to play, because that's how you wire up your brain. And so the book is not about social media. The book is about childhood and how we messed it up by taking away what they most needed. Well, there are other things they need, but play and a lot of independence. And we replaced it with algorithm-driven corporations that are worth trillions of dollars, and we don't pay them anything, trillions of dollars they have extracted from our children and all of us to sell. So when you have a childhood that is given over to three companies, TikTok, Meta, Snapchat, and Google for YouTube, when you have a childhood given over to four companies instead of actually playing, I'd call that a post-play childhood, and it is horrible.
So let's just dig into that a little bit, because this post-play childhood, this rewiring of young minds, you say is unprecedented in human history.
Yeah.
That's a huge statement.
Well, but it's easy to defend because there's a lot of scholarship on media effects, and big changes in media always have big changes in society. And the effects of television, the automobile, and the air conditioner in the 20th century transformed life in America and really reduced our trust in each other, because we're all inside. We're not out on our porches. So it's well known that when you have a big change in technology, if you invent fire, if you invent factories, if you give people automobiles, this massively changes the way people live. And if you massively change the way that people live, you're going to have all kinds of changes. The mind is not a computer. It's a complex dynamical system with a lot of parameters. And if you change 20 parameters, you're going to get change everywhere. Okay, now there has never, ever been a change in life, in childhood, as rapid as what happened between 2010 and 2015. So just to explain the concept of the rewiring, what it means is the rewiring of childhood, the inputs and outputs of childhood change. Now, I do also say that rewired the brain, but the rewiring is intended to refer to the rewiring of childhood. So I hope you don't mind, I'll just lay it out, because I think this is the crucial historical thing that people need to understand. In 2010, if you're 12 years old in 2010, you're just beginning puberty, your phone, you have a flip phone. In 2010, very few had a smartphone. So let's do it this way. If you're born in 1995, the last year of the millennials, you are hitting puberty in 2007, 2008. You have a flip phone. You don't have a smartphone. iPhone comes out in 2007, but kids don't really get them until 2011, 2012. There's no front-facing camera. There's no social media on your phone. You can use Facebook, but you have to go to your parents' computer to log on to Facebook. So you can't be on it for 5 hours a day. And you're using your phone, your flip phone, you're using it to call your friends and to text your friends, and that's pretty much it. Millennials, was there also Snake? I hear that there was a game called Snake that you used to play on your phone. But otherwise, that was it. Where suppose you were born in the year 2000, now you're Gen Z, you begin puberty, let's say around 2012, you're 12 years old. What happens? Your first phone, or you trade it in, you get a smartphone with a front-facing camera. It has Instagram. 2012 is when Facebook buys Instagram. They don't change it, but that's when it becomes super popular. And that's my best guess as to why 2012 is the pivotal year, because you see it especially in girls. In 2010, they were using their phones to talk to their friends and to get together with them. By 2015, they were posting photos and curating them. That's the great rewiring of childhood. The damage shows up first in the preteen girls. That's where we see the biggest increases in mental illness. The boys' story is more complicated. We'll get into that later. Their curves don't go up as sharply, because for them the key thing isn't anxiety and depression. I think it's the addiction and the loss of the ability to focus, pay attention, make plans, or do things in the world.
Dave, let's bring you into the conversation. You are a clinical psychologist. You are seeing patients, right? John is researching, he's writing, he's teaching. You are seeing patients. Tell us a little bit about what you are seeing on the front lines of this at the Child Mind Institute. Is this the anxious generation?
So I don't think that anyone at the Child Mind Institute would disagree with John on the fact that we're in a youth mental health crisis. And I think what we see on the front lines is the notion that we're in a digital age where there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. So our thinking oftentimes is, how do we help youth to integrate all of these digital changes? What you spoke about, the front-facing camera, the fact that smartphones are becoming much more ubiquitous in late middle school ages, and specifically completely ubiquitous in high school, and how we help youth to think about where the factors are in their well-being and what that balance looks like. So much of our clinical work, the way it has evolved over the course of the past, say, decade and a half, has been helping youth to take a look at their habits online, at the things that they're doing on their phone, at the ways they're spending their time, in as honest a way as we can get youth to disclose to us, and then to think about how we highlight for them all the different things that could be, in part, balanced in real life with what they're doing online. So how we ask them about their daily wellness habits like sleep, their diet, hydration, exercise and moving their bodies, what kind of in-person contact they get with friends, what kind of in-person contact with family, their level of investment at school, which John has recommendations about how we can create those types of school environments, how they structure their afternoons at home to make sure they're investing their time in the things that are most important for their development, be it extracurriculars or time with friends or homework, and saving screens as more of the kind of zones where we know that they can possibly be healthy as sources of entertainment for adolescents, as sources of social connection, sources of relaxation, and also making sure they don't infringe on sleep.
So we'll talk about the solutions, and you have 4 reforms, John, and we'll talk about some of the clinical solutions in a little bit. Are you seeing young people who are coming in showing signs of addiction to their devices or social media addiction? How many hours are young people in general spending?
So I think there's, something to disassemble about your question there, which is that we try to avoid using the term addiction around screens, mainly because the research and especially the ways that we construct substance use disorders is different than the way that we see kids behaving around screens. And what people will tend to do is kind of equate those two things and say, don't you agree that these are just as dangerous? And I think there's been a lot written about why we don't want to necessarily equate screens with drugs. And that it's not necessarily in that metaphor, while at the same time acknowledging the fact that there is research showing that kids are spending too much time on the screens, that there are risks related to content, that there are risks related to cyberbullying, racism, and all kinds of harassment that go on online, as well as communities online that promote really mentally unhealthy kind of habits and that can often be boosted by algorithms that social media companies use. So there's definite risks to map, as the Surgeon General in the last administration put out an advisory mapping those particular research-related risks. But I think we want to make sure that we're not taking a hyperbolic stance that sort of washes out many of the other factors in the equation.
And for clarity, I have a little bit of knowledge about this space. I, along with Matt O'Neill, who's here tonight, directed and produced a film for Bloomberg called Can't Look Away, the case against social media. And I think, Dave, given with what you're saying, John, perhaps it's worth talking about the algorithms and the role that these social media companies, these tech platforms are playing in all of this, and why we called a film Can't Look Away.
Right, sure. So I think a really important distinction that is rarely made is between social media and the internet. And every argument I ever hear about why it's important for kids to have social media, because it helps them find information, it helps them find their community, it's an outlet for expression. All of that kind of came in the 90s when we got the internet. What changed was that Facebook developed a business model that was engagement driven. Facebook, like a lot of these companies, they had no business model originally. It was just, let's just get people to use our app and we'll grow, because the value of a network grows increases according to the cube of the number of people on it. Mark Zuckerberg understood that before anyone else. And so the point is just grow, 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 and then we'll figure out how to monetize. And so early Facebook, I don't think was particularly harmful. There was no algorithm, there was no news feed. It was just, here's my page, I can look at your page, I can make comments on your page. So this all kind of crept up on us, and the internet was marvelous. We loved the internet in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it wasn't particularly toxic. Yes, some bad stuff happened, but everything changes after you get not just the iPhone, but the App Store. So now you have a thing in your pocket that every company and every man who wants sex with you can get to you through. I mean, the sextortion that happens when kids have a phone in their bed at night. So the internet is marvelous, but social media, once Facebook develops the algorithm-driven, the engagement-based business model, they literally rewarded their engineers for increasing time spent on the app. That is literally what they were motivated to do, by any means necessary. And we know this from internal documents. Perry's wonderful film is about Matt Bergman and the Social Media Victims Law Center, and these heroic firms and parents that are suing, and attorneys general that are suing. So we know exactly what they were doing, and they know what they were doing. And it is to grab eyeballs and never let go. So I'm not saying keep kids away from the internet. I'm saying we should keep them away from companies with predatory business models that are, their trillions of dollars are literally coming from exploiting children. They say they're doing it, the kids say they're doing it. And the other thing I'm really big on nowadays, we just had a post on my Substack today on video games, Roblox. Everything is now becoming a place where you can talk with anonymous, unverified strangers. And this includes literally millions of men who want sex with children, literally millions. And there's no safeguard. and everything's anonymous. So I now think we should simply never have platforms on which children are talking with strangers unless that platform has know your customer policies. If imagine some future company makes a competitor to Instagram, but they require people to identify themselves to the company the way a bank does. You can still post anonymously, but the company knows who you are. So now if you extort somebody, they can actually find you. That would solve the problem tomorrow, but we don't do that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, John, a little bit, in our film, like one of the ones that's particularly egregious is Snap.
It's horrible.
You want to tell everybody what makes that specifically so difficult?
Yeah. So I met Evan Spiegel like 10 or 12 years ago, and he told me, oh, it's just like texting with your friends, but it's better because it's photos. And I thought, okay, all right, maybe that's not so bad. But it turns out their business model is also just as engagement-based. And imagine an app in which the messages disappear right away and the company does not keep any record of them. Who is this for? It is ideally suited for criminals, drug dealers, sextortionists, and people who want to send naked photos of themselves. And so fine, look, if adults want to do that, that's fine. But the fact that this company has wormed its way, it is the default app, the go-to app. It has replaced texting. My daughter is 15. She says she's the only one in her high school who doesn't have Snapchat. This is horrible. And so, I created an account just to see what's going on. The company pushes you relentlessly to connect with people you don't know. So,
quick ad.
Snapchat is horrible stuff. It's great for drug dealers. It's great for sex. That's where a lot of the sextortion happens. That's where a lot of the suicides. I think I'm not sure about this, but I think pound for pound, I think that's more dangerous than TikTok or Instagram in terms of actual deaths because of the fentanyl overdoses.
There's a feature on Snap called Quick Ad. And when you go on, and let's say that Dave has 1,000 friends and I have 50, I have none.
I'm just on there so I can understand what.
Yeah, no. Absolutely. But the point is that if you are a young person and your friend has hundreds of friends and you don't, what Snap does, it allows you to do something called Quick Ad. And it looks like you're letting in lots of friends that know your friends so that it feels like it's perfectly safe. And what happens is a lot of times young people will just accept all of those quick ads. And what we know, because it's been studied, is that within 24 hours, your child's feed will have predators, sexual predators, drug dealers, and all sorts of people that you don't want your child in touch with. And then all of those messages that are going back and forth disappear. Now, that's just one point about social media, and I don't want to go down that road too much. Dave, what I want to ask you, and tell me if you have something that you want to respond to in that before I pivot. Okay, go for it.
Not just about Snapchat, but I mean, I think what John highlights is, our position as an organization is we want to make it extremely expensive to prey on kids like you're talking about. In the sense that I think we can all agree that the social media platforms need massive reforms in order to be at all considered even remotely safe. Not to mention, I think you highlighted something that I will often speak about in talks because I'm incredibly concerned about younger kids with anonymous chat, where I have had FBI agents, police officers, and others walk up to me after tech talks around the United States and say, I'm so glad you mentioned the chat in Roblox or the chat in these things because literally that is where the majority of predators are hanging out at this stage of the game. So, these are things that are absolutely chilling when we think about these kinds of effects. What we want to think about is how do we make this so expensive for companies that might be existing in this predatory way, or how do we make it so that funding, similar to legislation for companies that have engaged in predatory practices, funds not only that reform, but also investment in a number of other factors. Because I think where we diverge to a certain degree is, there's definite risks that I think we would map in our research as well as in our collaborations across the country with social media. But we also are very focused on the range of factors that play a role in accelerating the youth mental health crisis. And so when I look at policy legislation and talk to government officials, I want to say, look, I get that it might be the most popular issue for your constituents to be able to say, I want Snapchat to change. Make them pay. and then make Snapchat pay for school counselors. Make Snapchat pay to make it more easily able to access mental health care in the country. Don't just make it harder for kids to access Snapchat, make it more easy for kids to access the services they need. And the more we have those multi-pronged solutions, I think the better.
But I wonder if I could follow up. So what is your position on 11 and 12-year-old kids using social media? Do you think that they should not do it and we should have a clear policy and we should not let kids on below 13?
Right, so I don't know that there's any developmental reason why an 11 or 12-year-old would need to use social media. There's no reason for that. At the same time, what we know across our work and talking to families across the country, parents will often have difficulty stopping kids from accessing these apps or getting on these apps or figuring out ways to access it with friends. So I think a lot of our work is focusing on digital literacy at earlier and earlier ages in the hope that starting at 11 or 12, maybe this is a moment for families, while we wait for these massive reforms that we want to take place, to begin exploring those things together, talking and mapping the risks, and talking about why we think the kids are not ready for this at that age.
Because I think the main area where you and I disagree, so we agree on a lot. We agree there's a youth mental health crisis. We agree a lot of kids are getting hurt on social media. There are predatory practices. The companies are greedy and exploitative. So we agree on most of the issues here. But as we were talking in the green room and just now, I think your position is we've got to make these platforms safer for kids. Right?
I think we have to regulate the platform significantly. I'm not sure there is a safe for kids option necessarily.
Right. Okay. All right, maybe we agree on that.
Yeah, I think
because my view, just to lay out the 4 reforms in the book, because we're all in this because it's a set of collective action problems. Why is there pressure on me to give my daughter Snapchat? Because everyone else has it, and same thing for the phone, And when I started this, I heard this over and over again. Trains left the station. The future is digital. They're going to have to live in this world. They got to learn. Can't put the genie back in the bottle. And you said something to that effect. You think that and so I think there's our major disagreement is you and some others think like, well, we have to teach kids to use it better.
Yes.
And I say we could teach kids to use heroin better. We could teach them to go to prostitutes better. There's all kinds of things we should teach kids to do better. Or we can have a minimum age. We have minimum ages for 4 reasons. If something is addictive, if it's extreme sexuality, if extreme violence, or other kinds of harm. A kid on social media talking with strange anonymous men is all 4. So, I think my view is with these 4 reforms, we can roll back the phone-based childhood. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to make a huge, just to lay them out. So it's no smartphone before high school. Just give kids a flip phone the way the millennials had. No social media before 16. This is just not appropriate for children. It really should be 18, but I wanted a norm that could actually get adopted, so I said 16. Phone-free schools. There was no argument for kids having phones in their pockets during school. And far more independence and free play and responsibility in the real world. If we do those 4 things, it's like we give water back to plants. It's like we give back a normal human childhood. All 4 of those steps cost about $1.50 to do. It doesn't cost anything to do any of these things. And where they're being tried, they're really effective. Phone-free schools has a magical impact on so many things in schools. Play, giving kids more play. There's play therapy, is much faster than Prozac and more effective. So these things are very cheap. They are likely to have very big effects. And I don't really want us to focus on digital literacy for 9 and 10-year-olds. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Obviously, they need to learn how to use Google. So let me take that back. They need to learn how to use computers, Google, all that. I'm just saying social media, we should not be teaching them to use social media at 10, 11, 12.
So is it okay if we go off the rails?
Yes.
Because I know
I'm going to bring you back on the rails because I want to make sure that we're
this way.
giving concrete information to everybody. But go off.
Well, so I guess I think this is where, again, if we play this out, we'll likely find some common ground on this. But your son's taking a driver's test tomorrow, right? And much of the country, 16 is the age at which we take driver's tests. Now, there are significant dangers associated with operating an automobile. We know these. As a country, at times we've moved to make sure there are safety measures around those things, like making sure that seatbelts are required, making sure there are laws around car seats, things like that, because we know people are going to be driving, even though automobiles are one of the riskiest things in the country. To be sure, I think about this all the time because I have a fear of flying on planes, but I'm much more at risk in the car on the way to the airport than I am on the actual plane. Doesn't do much for me. But the whole thing is your son doesn't wake up at any point and suddenly know how to drive a car. So if we then think about kids not being on social media till 16, how do we make them ready? How do we make sure they can drive the car when they suddenly go on the social media?
Well, first, these programs are so easy to use. I mean, it would take a week or two for him to learn. So it's not, whereas driving, it takes several months. Sure. So all these technologies, it's not like in the 90s when kids were learning to program, which was hard. It's as easy as could possibly be.
It's true. They're meant to be frictionless.
Yeah,
that's how
right.
Digital design is meant to be, whereas a car is
right.
not frictionless.
There's
a lot to learn.
But the car analogy is a really good one, because in the 1960s, cars had very few safety features, and they resisted mightily. They said no, and what Ralph Nader did, and what the consumer rights movement did, Nader looked back on it at a certain point in the 80s, and he said, what it did, when they started getting crash tests and crash test data, now that there was clear metrics, suddenly car companies started competing on safety. Safety wasn't this annoying expense that they wanted to minimize. Volvo was the first to say, like, buy a Volvo, you'll be safe, you won't die, your kids won't die. And I'm waiting for the first social media company to say, let your kids hear, they won't be sextorted, and that's Pinterest. Pinterest is actually really good. Bill Reddy ended social features for under 16, so all social media is not bad, but the big ones are horrible. I'm sorry, just to get back to your question, sure, we should teach them, but the idea that kids will go further if they start early was just not true. If we teach kids to drink or have sex when they're 8, they're not going to be better lovers when they're adults. Like, start it at an appropriate age.
But what we've learned from the field of sex education is that abstinence-only education doesn't work. Kids end up being less safe, and they end up making poor decisions, and they end up also not considering certain things that we want them to consider when we center sex education around safety, consent, and kind of considerations of romantic relationships. So digital literacy is going to happen. We've got to figure out how we make sure kids are aware of how to be safe in all those spaces. And I would go back to your earlier point. While Instagram is really easy to learn how to use in a couple days, I don't think you learn how to use it safely in a couple days. And I think that takes a critical thinking aspect that needs to be part and parcel of all digital literacy that I don't think you would argue with, and one that we have to really be thinking
But the
about.
sooner it becomes embedded in their daily life, now that kids don't even text anymore, now that it's all Snapchat, and this is going on from age 10, that kind of guides your development to the point where, how are you going to get it out? So suppose, okay, let me put this to you. How many of you ever hire people? You're involved in hiring decisions. Raise your hand if you ever hire people. Okay, who would you rather have to run some, in some communications function, let's say? You're hiring 21-year-olds out of college. Candidate A has been on the app since she was 10. She's on them 6 or 8 hours a day. This is what she's done since she was 10. Candidate B had a strict upbringing. She never had any of this stuff until she was 16, or let's even make it 18. She never had it until she was 18. She was out playing, she can look people in the eye, she can talk to people, and then when she was 18, she got all this stuff, and then she learned how to use it. But she's only been on it for 3 years, and this other person's been on it for 12 years. Who would you rather hire? Raise your hand if you'd rather hire person A who's been on since she was 10. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you'd rather hire the one who was never on until she was 16. Because we all see what it's doing. Anyone working with kids, they can't look me in the eye. As soon as something goes wrong, they crack. I gave her some negative feedback and she didn't come to work the next day, ghosting. So something is deeply wrong when we start the kids on this stuff early.
I'm going to take it back for a moment. We're in agreement that there is a mental health crisis of our youth at this point in time. Agreed? And we're talking about the role that these tech companies have played in all of this. They prioritize usage over safety. There's no doubt about it. Their algorithms are designed to keep our young people on them as long as possible. We know that. We know that from internal documentation. And yet, we can agree that digital literacy would need to be a part of a comprehensive program. We cannot get basic legislation passed. And I'm sure everyone here has seen, when we see them, the heads of these companies all brought in front of Congress, and there's lots of yelling and screaming and grandstanding and all of these things that have happened, and nothing has happened. Yeah. So why? And let me start with you, John. Why is that we can't even get the Kids Online Safety Act passed? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, so first, to be really clear, let's put this in perspective. The states are acting like crazy. The states are doing all kinds of things. State government still works, Most governors are parents, red state, blue state, there's no difference. It's been extraordinary to see how fast things are moving at the state level. Internationally, things are moving really fast. Australia raised the age, Brazil banned phones. All of this stuff happened within the first year after The Anxious Generation came out. And it was usually because either the politician was a woman, as in Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Kathy Hochul, or the politician was married to a woman who read the book and said, as in Australia, Peter, you have to read this book and then you have to do something. She said, you have to effing do something about it. And he introduced the first bill to raise the age to 16 with enforcement, make the companies enforce it. So legislation is happening all around, internationally and at the state level. It's just not happening in Congress because our Congress is broken in many ways. COSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, incredible bipartisan bill. It's not really a game changer. It does some simple things, some important, but it's not going to like really be a big change. But it's something. It would be the first thing we've ever done to protect kids online, ever. 2 bills in the 1990s kind of backfired. So this simple bill, 91-3 in the Senate, totally bipartisan. It passes out of the House committee. It's got strong support in the House. This is all last fall. And then Speaker Johnson won't bring it up for a vote. And like, why is that? And you know, we're all making calls.
Why is it?
Well, then we see a little article in the newspaper, Meta to build $10 billion AI facility in Louisiana. That's Johnson and Steve Scalise. So the House Republican leadership is Louisiana. Meta will spend any amount of money to block federal legislation. That's why we don't have it. Meta, that's it. But the states, but they don't have as much influence in Brazil or Australia or in the state houses.
Dave, let's pivot for a moment to the role that parents can play, because this is something else that's been quite contentious, and everybody should know about this. The tech platforms would argue that this is a problem that should be dealt with at home, that parents should be taking care of this and dealing with this with their children. And of course, we all want parents to have robust conversations with the young people in their lives, but it's really complicated for parents to sort of keep up with the technology that their kids are engaging in. I'm curious, Dave, from where you stand, what is it that you find as a clinician that is most helpful in terms of helping the young people in our lives when it comes to digital well-being?
I mean, the reality is that, you know, we want to make sure that we stay away from the kind of blaming language that tech companies use, in the sense that they act like this is just a moral failing on the part of parents, and if parents could just regulate this well enough, then we'd be fine. Instead, we want to acknowledge a parent's reality, which is that they see their child using screens. I mean, I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. My 9-year-old started having a laptop be sent home with him from school every single day this year in 3rd grade. So going back to your point about the notion that we have to teach digital literacy, we just may not teach it about social media, that became the major conversation across my son's entire grade level, was there's a laptop coming home every day, what do we do with this? How do you put the guardrails? Never mind the fact that when we got the 3rd grade parents together in my son's grade, there are 9 other devices in the house. It's not as if the laptop changed the ball game and there were no iPads before that, no smartphones, no other family computers. It was just that this computer, for most of the kids in my son's grade, each of them thought it was like their domain. Like, you don't go on my computer, I get to use this computer, let's think about what this looks like. So much of the conversation for us has been going through a series of steps with any parent who comes into the office, where we'll say, first I want you to get to know all this stuff. Just in general. Like, we're not just going to read articles about it. We're not going to think like, I don't want my kid to go on this particular thing, or I don't want them to play this game, or I don't want them to use this particular thing in school. Get to know everything the teacher is recommending. Take a look at their computer, look at what safeguards are on it. Let's kind of get a lay of the land and understand the landscape. And many parents will say, I don't feel like I'm digitally able to do that. I don't know if I can understand these things. And we try to provide as many resources as we possibly can to help parents feel like they understand. Because the number of parents that I've had in my office who say, I know Snapchat is bad, but I've never seen it. Or I know Instagram is bad,
Right, exactly.
but I don't use it. Or I know Facebook is bad, but I haven't gone on it in 4 years. Or I only use it for the moms groups that will tell me about what's going on in the neighborhood, or, you know, for birthday parties. And so we really want people to be digital neighbors to kids, to learn what's going on first. We want them to educate themselves on the risks, and then we want them to think about each stage of their kids' development, how devices are going to play a role, how screens are coming into play, and then how we can also help them through a wellness checklist that balances, as I was saying in kind of the first answer, the IRL tasks that are incredibly in real life. that are incredibly important to kids' development and that are really, driving the bus in terms of their mental health, so that we can help parents think of a lot of the time that kids spend on screens as something where, especially for a lot of the kids we work with, if a kid has a mental health or learning disorder, we'll say to parents, we don't necessarily think screens are causing that particular thing. We do think that there are many situations where it can play an accelerating effect. We want you to be aware of those risks depending on your child's diagnosis and how that interacts with screens. Like, for example, for the patients I treat with ADHD, we want parents to be aware that their executive functioning is unlikely to put guardrails on the time they're spending on screens. So we've got to put more structure on how we monitor their time spent and kind of what they're doing. If it's a kid with depression, we know that depression already pushes a kid into time alone in their bedroom, saying that activities won't be that fun because this is the anhedonia of depression and they're not really going to have fun with friends and they're not going to find social connections. So those are the moments where we'll say to a parent, we don't want a kid in their room further engaging with screens or social media because we know that could be playing an accelerating effect. We want to map those kind of risks for parents.
Yeah, so I would add that the argument, the tech companies are pushing, they push one set of arguments to the left about how social media is a lifeline to LGBTQ, which is not true. In fact, LGBTQ kids are the most likely to be harassed, sexually abused, and regret their time on it. They push another set of arguments to people on the right, which is free speech, government overreach, government regulation. It's the parent's job, the parent's right. Who's the government to tell you it? So they push these arguments very deliberately to try to block legislation. But the fact that these people in Silicon Valley who know the most about these things, and if anybody could use them wisely with their kids and put on the right features, it's them. The fact that they send their kids to the Waldorf school, the fact that they make their nannies sign contracts pledging that, committing them to not let the kids have any screens. The fact that the people who know the most about this are the ones most adamant about their kids not getting it, well, that's like cocaine dealers. Drug dealers don't want their kids to have drugs. They want your kids to have drugs. And so the idea that this should be a parent's right thing or parents, is just complete and utter nonsense. This is the most addictive thing you can expose kids to. And I'll use the word addiction because, granted, it's different from a heroin addiction, but it's not different from a gambling addiction. And a lot of the software...
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I'm a psychologist, and I taught Psych 101, and we teach about behaviorism and how do you make a rat do something. We'll put it on a variable ratio reward schedule. You don't give it a food pellet every single time. You randomly every 10th time, but with variation. That's the most addictive pattern. If you want to control an animal's behavior, you put it on a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. That's what slot machines do. The gambling industry employs a lot of psychologists. They try to maximize your ability to just lose yourself in it, waste time, give dopamine on just a schedule to keep you addicted. And it is agreed to be an addiction. It is compulsive behavior that you do even though you know it's ruining your life, ruining your family, ruining your health. So if gambling is an addiction, I'm not saying every kid who's on 10 hours a day is addicted. That's not true. But a lot of them, especially boys on video games, a lot of that, about 10%, 10 to 15% of the boys do, I think, qualify for addiction. That's a lot of boys to lose. Wait, I'm sorry, what was your question again? Sorry, I go off on that.
You were about to do the boy thing. I was waiting for the...
Let's pivot, because John, you did raise that there was a difference between the way that girls... the way that girls respond and the way that boys respond. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I started this, in 2019, I wrote an article called The Coddling the American Mind in 2015. It was about the overprotection. And then wrote a book with the same title. But when I really got into the evidence on social media in 2019, what was clear is that girls who are heavy users have 2 to 3 times the rate of anxiety and depression, and there's evidence that it's causal, it's not just reverse causality. So I thought that was the clear story, and that's still true. And when I started writing the book, I didn't know what the story was for boys. And I thought, well, maybe it'll be video games. But the evidence on video games is much more mixed. Boys who play video games 2 or 3 hours a day, it is not associated with depression and anxiety. But here's what I realized. I was way too focused on depression and anxiety. That's the central thing for girls. That's related to eating disorders. It's related to self-harm. So social media is the main culprit for girls. There's a lot else going on, but that's it. For boys, it's not. A lot of harms. Violence, drug dealing, being lured into the bathroom so that you can be videotaped being attacked, and that in order to put it up on social media. So boys suffer a lot, but it's not causing them to be depressed and anxious. For boys, what I've come to see is it is the open season on boys' brains, on boys' dopamine circuits by everybody who has an addictive product. So for boys, it starts with video games, and we know from the designers there, they literally pay their people to increase engagement, to increase time spent. And also different monetization strategies to get the boys to actually give money. So it starts with video games, it moves on to porn, it's vaping, it's marijuana pens. When they're older, it's crypto investing, it's gambling, it's sports betting. And you can gamble in a lot of these video games. Real money. Kids, boys especially, are being hooked on gambling when they're 13 years old or even younger. So this isn't making them depressed and anxious, it's making them dysfunctional, unable to focus, unable to graduate from school, unable to ever attract a spouse or an employer. This is really, really bad. This is what we're doing to boys. And so when I started this, I thought that the girls had it worse. I thought if you check in on kids at 14, the girls are more anxious, depressed, and unhappy. The boys are really enjoying the video games. They're really enjoying the porn. So their lives they're not that unhappy at 14. But now let's check in on them when they're in their mid-20s. The girls have finished high school, finished college, moved out of the house, gotten a job. That's a lot less true of the boys. So we are wasting extraordinary numbers of boys' lives and boys' talents, and it's going to get a lot worse as AI comes in. And the video games and the porn are going to be 10 times more addictive, and we're never going to see them again. So if we can't get this right on social media and smartphones, if we can't say, you know what, we need an age-gated internet just like we have an age-gated world. There should be minimum ages for these things. If we can't do this on social media, then let's just give up, because there's no way we'll do it for AI.
But let's just for a moment, because I do want to get granular in the 8 minutes that we have left before we pivot to your questions, in terms of what we can do. Before we do that pivot, a very quick moment on AI. This is not a conversation about AI, but you just brought it up, John, in terms of it being, talk about an accelerant, that AI is going to be. Now, people are sitting there thinking, well, what is it that ChatGPT is going to do? But that's not what we're talking about. Dave, do you want to talk about AI for a moment, about what might be coming, or who wants to? You want to do this?
I mean, I think we're just, to build on one point that you're saying, I think that what we're seeing similar to a lot of the digital age is that folks may not realize how widespread the influence of a certain thing is until it's become incredibly widespread. So we're commonly seeing a major age gap right now where there's, to your point about ChatGPT, a thought that AI is a kind of narrow band, like dialogue thing that I would go to on the internet, versus the idea that, in fact, most content that's being fed to us at this point is somehow affected by AI already. Whether it's scripts that are being written on anything that we would see, whether it's kids using it for academics and using it for school. And now, I mean, my wife is a professor, a college professor. She includes as part of her syllabus at Yale, here are the permitted uses of AI in my class, here are the non-permitted uses. You know, here's how I will attempt to detect whether or not you're using this. And I think that we're getting to a point, to John's point as well, where people are going to feed these things through AI. It won't take psychologists talking about intermittent reinforcement schemas, but rather just saying to an AI, here's how I want this to work, build it for me, and it takes seconds.
Right, and the other problem that we're seeing that's happening with young people, and it's just beginning, are what they call companion bots. So not an information bot like ChatGPT, but things on character AI, for instance, where young people are having real relationships with bots. And what we know is young people, because they're so immersed in digital worlds, are able to what they call shift in and out of AI and human worlds, and they're having relationships that are artificial, but really feel like real relationships. We're not going to get into that too much, because in our time remaining, what I'd love to hear from both of you, you mentioned, John, the 4 reforms that you speak of. What can schools do? And I'm going to ask both of you, what should schools be doing when it comes to digital devices and social media?
So digital devices, their primary effect is distraction. All of tech companies pushed and manipulated to force schools to take on devices and push them down into elementary school. There's no evidence that these things help. and there's increasing evidence that they're hurting. Test scores in the United States have gone actually up from 1971. They were rising slowly but steadily throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. They went down during COVID, and people said, oh, wow, look what COVID did. But actually, they peaked in 2012, and they started going down after 2012. This is true around the world, actually. Humanity was getting smarter for about 100 years, and now we're getting stupider. I can't prove that it's because kids are not paying any attention in school. I can't prove it's because they're watching porn and picking fights all day long rather than listening to the teacher or talking to each other. But it's a pretty obvious hypothesis that when kids are not listening, they're not learning. And if you put a computer on a kid's desk, it's going to end up on YouTube. It's YouTube Shorts, for the most part, is what they do. And so the ed tech has been a complete disaster, pushed on us with no evidence of benefit, huge amounts of money at stake. Oh, and the degree to which they take your kids' data and sell, it's unbelievable what we've allowed to happen. So the easy thing for schools to do, which is happening, is phone-free schools, because everyone hates the phones. The teachers have found it impossible. The administrators hate it. So phone-free schools is happening at lightning speed. More than 10 states have done true phone-free. Other states have done the wimpy thing, which is you can't use your phone during class. You have to think about it during class, and then as soon as the bell rings, then you can be on it. But I'm hopeful but many countries are going phone-free. So schools, it's phone-free schools. Then it's roll back all the ed tech, especially in elementary school. Get it all out of elementary school, just paper and pencil. And then the third is far more free play, because our kids have a post-play education. Many of us older people, we had 2 recesses a day when we were kids. If you are a prisoner in a federal penitentiary, you are guaranteed 2 hours of yard time a day. Our kids get 20 minutes, a lot of them. So, of course they're disengaged. School sucks. You're just watching YouTube videos all day. So we've got to give them back a lot more play, longer recess, open the playground half an hour early before school, let them play before they come in, keep it open 3 to 5 p.m., let them play after school.
Dave, what would you like to see from schools? What should we be demanding of our schools?
So as I was kind of saying in the green room, a lot of the Child Mind Institute's positioning is to take what John will propose as a first step and then to say, here's the rest of the context I'd also want to add. So in the sense that I don't think that most psychologists would argue with John's point that tech is distracting and that it's particularly distracting in schools, or the experience of watching students over the course of the last, say decade, where we're seeing the increased use of ed tech, failed initiatives like getting iPads in every school across most major cities, kids being distracted by phones in school, cyberbullying happening during class, and college students who are really just opening up their laptops to look like they're taking notes starting in the early 2000s and currently may have any number of different things open that are maybe bringing their attention away from class. So to be sure, the process of learning, there's not a great argument that the devices are augmenting it or accelerating it. Once you get the devices out of school, we would argue that there isn't a great strength of evidence that achievement or academic performance increases or improves just after you get the devices out. That might be just a first step. You've got the devices gone, maybe kids are a little bit less distracted. But if we want to talk about major movements in this country, there's more context there. The Bush administration, in passing No Child Left Behind, fundamentally changed public school across the United States in saying school funding is going to be linked to standardized tests, and school funding is going to be linked to how well you do on reading, writing, and math in particular. We're not talking about science or social studies. We'll worry about those particular things later. And it fundamentally changed the way that we teach kids from early ages and changed the way that school might be interesting or focused on, for example, project-based learning or ways of fostering critical thought. So the reality is we can take the devices out of school. We still have a massive shortage of school counselors with bills that cannot get out of state houses or out of the federal government to improve that, and a total dismantling of Department of Education, and a total kind of pivot away from thinking about mental health solutions. So mental health in our schools is not happening. A real focus on good prevention and intervention strategies in schools is not happening. Thinking about the way that we learn and what best evidence-based practices might get kids engaged with learning is definitely not happening. And to John's point, play has pretty much disappeared after 4th grade. So we got a lot of issues to solve, even after we get the devices out of school. And that was very sobering with 24 seconds left before we go to the question. My 9-year-old and 6-year-old, I'm mad at their math packets this summer, I'm just saying. They're all worksheets, there's no critical thinking, I'm just done.
All right. On that note, we're going to open it up to your questions. There are 2 microphones one on each side of the room, and we welcome your questions. Don't be shy.
Hi, a question for John. During your talk, you said that the people in Silicon Valley are protecting their own kids by doing things such as sending them to Waldorf schools. Can you explain what they're getting by sending their kids to the Waldorf school, for example?
And can you explain what a Waldorf school is?
Very brief. So the Waldorf school, it grows. There's a guy from,
Thank you.
I forget, Austria, Germany, mid-20th century, I think. He had some sort of unusual ideas about education that I think a lot of people here don't buy into. But they're one of the few schools that has absolutely no devices. Everything is paper and pencil. They have a lot of experience-based learning. And so it's at least well known as, people pick it for the device-free rather than for the sort of obscure philosophy. And there's 2 in Silicon Valley, and so a lot of the tech executives send their kids there. Also, there's great reporting by Nellie Bowles, and then she had a couple of articles in the 2010s. That's Barry Weiss's wife. Reporting on habits in Silicon Valley. That's where I got the claims about that they don't let their nannies show their kids phones. Are there schools can anyone know? I guess a lot of you are probably raising kids in New York or out here. Are there schools in New York that are phone-free, that are completely device-free? Are there? Call them out. Steiner, that's right. That's the other one. Right, Steiner. Is there another one?
Sag Harbor.
Which one?
Sag Harbor.
Oh, Sag Harbor is device-free? No laptops, no iPads? Oh, okay. And I hear Southampton just passed, or East Hampton. One of the schools out here passed. Yeah. So phone-free is a good first step, but the Waldorf school goes a lot further, and and that's where a lot of the tech executives send their kids.
Back here, hi. 2 brief questions. You gave some examples, excuse me, Australia, Brazil, other countries. Are there any other countries or regions that are setting a good or better example, i.e., where can we move to? I'm just kidding. There's no escape. I mean, as we know, governments change. So, and the other question is, as adults, as parents, as psychologists, are there any apps, social media apps, that any of you find useful or that you use?
Sure, I'll take it first. So I've spoken with, I often offer myself to do a Zoom call if I can get the Minister of Education or Health in a country. I say I or my team will do a Zoom call with them and their team. And the one place that we found that didn't fall for this all is Singapore. In Singapore, they never let phones in the schools. You know, Singapore is a much more, how to put it? Their government is much more controlling than most democratic governments. And in this case, they were able to ward that off. But most of the developed world did the same thing. And that's why we have this really unusual synchronized increase in the early 2010s, because the whole developed world did the same thing and our kids became more depressed and anxious at the same time. And then, I'm sorry, your other question was, is there any social media that's useful? Well, yeah, I mean, I was on Twitter for many years. I hate it, and it drove me mentally ill for a while. But it is actually very useful, and I still use it to get the word out. I don't want to tell adults what to do. Adults can use social media as a tool to advance their careers. Adults have a reason to network. 12-year-olds don't. So that's what I'm really focused on. I'm hopeful that there will be non-predatory social media companies that will compete. But again, the value of a network increases according to the cube of the number of people. So the big networks it's very hard to displace them.
You know, just to also point out, we were talking about it in the green room a little bit before we came here, is that this is very similar to what we saw happen with the opioid epidemic, with Purdue Pharma and the release of OxyContin in 1996. And tobacco, and these are companies that know what they're doing, and we're seeing that play out here. And in general, what I was told, and I am not a psychologist, I can pretend to be one, but is that oftentimes the apps that have a lot of reinforcement, the likes, the badges, the those dopamine hits, can be really the more complicated ones for our young people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, That's right. That's why I say let's keep them away from apps that are designed after gambling machines. Let's keep them away from apps that put them in contact with strange men.
Yes, over here.
Hi. I just wonder if you have any suggestions for parents and kids who are younger than 16 who are already on social media, specifically Snapchat, in terms of, a middle ground. Is there a middle ground that, families can follow rather than just a straight up digital detox?
That's a great question. Dave, do you want to talk about that?
There's the public messaging, and then there's the reality, in the sense that you end up making personal decisions for your kid based on what you think they can handle. And to your point about the middle ground, these are often the discussions that we're having with patients, where a parent may say, look, I heard John speak, I read The Anxious Generation, and John, I think you've actually talked on podcasts that you had slightly different things that you did for both of your kids around this kind of stuff. But it was that, I heard this stuff, but at the same time, they're already on this. This is already a way that, they make social connections or connect with their friends. What can I do? And my answer is get more involved. In the same way that we might be concerned about a kid in any social interaction in real life, where we might want to listen a little bit more closely or be with their friends, we can limit the amount of time they spend connecting with friends on that. It's okay to be a little bit the evil parent on this and say, look, I know your friends have no boundaries in their Snapchat use, but here are the hours or the time that I'm willing to allow you to spend on this. And beyond that, teach me. Show me how it's meaningful for your life and how it's making a difference. And maybe that'll help us to be able to have a dialogue about what's going on it and the kinds of risks that you're facing.
And I'd just like to add on top of that, any kind of intervention, anything you do with your kids is going to be really painful for your kids if they're the only one. And so if you can just talk to the parents of 2 or 3 of your kids' best friends, and if they're all willing to do it together, then it's not going to be very painful at all. And what I would suggest you do, I heard one couple I met, they gave their daughter 10 minutes a day on Snapchat. She has 10 minutes, which means she can find out what's going on, but she can't be doing the exchanging. I was talking with some kids who were saying, no, it's not that bad. It's really just we just talk with their friends. Say, how many friends do you have on Snapchat? 1,000? And it's all the quick ad stuff. So you could say you can have 5 or 10 minutes a day, and you can only have 50 friends. That way you're not connecting with millions of strangers. But it is really hard. Once you get into it, so I'm not saying to parents, take them off. But as Dave said, you can put really tight limits so that they won't feel entirely left out. Like with video games, I kept my son off. My son understands that I kept him off of Snapchat and Instagram. He was okay with that. But he does wish I had let him on Fortnite in 6th grade because that's all the boys were doing. And in retrospect, I wish I had said, you can play for an hour or 2 a day on the weekends, and that's it. Because then at least he wouldn't have been left out. But a lot of other boys were playing 4, 5, 6 hours a day. So, it's terrible stuff. But again, as Dave said, you can put extreme limits on.
So I always like the question of how are you walking the walk? Mm-hmm. So my 9-year-old has a group of friends who currently have commandeered iPads and other devices in their houses, created for themselves accounts and created a text string. And he is deeply disturbed that we will not allow him to join the text string that has become conversations with the principal 3 times over the course of 3rd grade. But we won't allow him to join the text string. But to John's point, he pleaded with us and said, can I learn how to play some video games? I literally don't understand what they're talking about. And so we said the exact same thing. Invite your buddy Nolan over or your buddy Luke. You can play it with us, at home while you two are in person together playing this game and learn what the game is and learn how to play it and be able to talk about it. And this is how he learned what Minecraft was so that when we went to see the movie, we didn't fully misunderstand the role of the pink sheep and that kind of stuff. But it's about, I think, that balance where you're looking for how you can find that middle ground.
I want to add something because there is one area where I think that having a conversation with your kids can be really helpful after I just said about not blaming parents, but this is something that's not blaming parents, but it's really important, and that is the sextortion that's happening on Instagram. And I'm not going to get into it because we don't have time. However, there are people that are being sextorted, and bad things are happening because they're afraid to go tell an adult because they're embarrassed that they have sent nude pictures and compromising pictures. Talk to your children, talk to your loved ones, talk to your grandchildren, and tell them that if it ever happens to them, that there are open lines of communication with complete amnesty, because that has been an area that we've seen a real problem.
I tend to go in the kind of drug and alcohol conversation, a similar talking point, where it's that we want there to be a good Samaritan policy of if you tell me about it first, or if you tell me in trouble, the consequence will always be less than it would have been if I found out about it on my own. And I like to leave that kind of nebulous. The full amnesty, that makes sense, but I think it helps kids to know we're going to really try not to freak out and be totally dysregulated if they tell us something is happening. And it's helped a number of my patients who've been sextorted to go to their parents and say, this person's claiming to have hacked my phone. Mom, I swear to God, I didn't mean to do it, but I sent a naked photo to a boy in 9th grade last year. I'm scared they have it. I'm scared they're going to release it to my whole school. And of course, the parents were freaking out behind the scenes. But what we're trying to do is provide support to somebody who really feels, victimized in that moment.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I promise, now that you've heard this conversation about sextortion, you will find somebody who has had a child who has had this happen. It's happening, unfortunately, quite a bit. Okay, thank you.
Now that it's summertime, and a lot of us, I have two grandsons who are away in summer camp, and both camps have no devices. They're playing all the time. What happens when they come home? Why all of a sudden can they not survive again without their device?
Yeah. Summer camp is one of the best things going. Summer camp that are device-free they restore play-based childhood. The kids are playing all day. They're having intense social interactions. Summer camps are wonderful. And then I hear the story over and over again. My daughter was, surly or anxious or depressed or withdrawn. Then she went to summer camp. When she came back, she was my wonderful, funny kid that I had a few years ago. And then she got back on her phone, and then she turned back into that. So I think now that we all understand what's going on, now I think parents who send their kids to summer camp should really try. That is a gift to you, that your kid, her brain was literally, the dopamine neurons were readapting to a normal equilibrium level. Don't lose that. Talk to parents of your kids' friends and agree, even if our kids were on social media before, we're going to really cut it back, or we're going to, so don't lose that. It is very much like a heroin addiction. It takes a couple of weeks to detox.
I think it's an incredibly pertinent question because I'm getting all the reentry questions right now from any family that I work with. Because the question is, look, they've gone to camp, and folks, one of the difficulties too is that there are devices being sold online right now that are phone concealers for summer camp. So I would say the majority of my patients have gotten a device to camp, but they only use it like at night or at certain moments, and some of them have gotten their devices confiscated, like it's the Wild West out there. But to this point, people will come back, and I'll say to parents, this is a wonderful moment to just rethink your family's screen policies. If you want screen-free meals, if you want to say, here are the hours where we're going to use screens, and we're not going to do it alone in our rooms, and it's not going to infringe on sleep, this is a wonderful time to set that boundary, and then to think about how you necessarily keep those boundaries up as you move into the school year. It doesn't have to be returned in the same way that kids come home from summer camp. So I was a camp director before I became a psychologist. This is, my previous life. But it's I would get calls as well because kids start swearing at camp like banshees. And then they come home dropping F-bombs left and right, and parents will call me up and say, what did you teach them at camp? I don't understand. They're swearing, and I would say, look, they were with their peers the entire time. Look at the friendships they made. Look at the relationships they built. Look at how they're burning through your phone lines, but at the same time, you need to reset the policy around swear words. We're sorry, that's just not something we can regulate at night while the counselors are engaging in further professional education.
I've never heard of phone concealers. That's a first.
My favorite was there's one particular kid where I considered it a victory because he was bringing 5 devices to camp, all concealed in water bottles, secret compartments of bags, all that kind of stuff. And I got it down to 2 devices. And I consider that a victory just because it was a 60% reduction in devices. And one of them got confiscated almost immediately because one of the things that's great about working with kids with ADHD is they don't tend to be good criminals. They don't tend to watch out for when the counselor's coming. So we got a call the first week, a device had been, confiscated, and I was all right, that's 1 down. This kid has 1 left.
This is rather like drug addict behavior. I just got to point that out.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you guys so much. This is a great panel. So to that point, what does good look like? What is the appropriate amount of screen time, let's say for a 16-year-old, for a 12-year-old, if any?
Yeah. Yeah. So the key thing here is don't think about screen time per se. Think about good uses of screens and bad uses of screens. I'll give you the extremes. Here's a good use of a screen. Your kid watching a movie with someone else, which is a long movie, and it has a story that involves moral concerns. And that's almost all real movies. Humans are storytelling animals. Children have always been raised in a sea of stories. They need to read, they need epic poems or, Star Wars trilogies. So all that stuff is good. Your kid is better off watching 2 movies a week than 0 movies a week. That's good. Here's what's bad. A kid alone with a touchscreen device which ends up on either TikTok or YouTube Shorts. That's where it always ends up, or porn or video games. That's always bad. There should be 0 of that. You should not let your kid ever have that. And I say wait until he's 14 to give him a device, but don't give them an iPad when they're young. I'm hearing stories increasingly from people who teach preschool. Kids sometimes cry at drop-off, because mom's leaving. No, it's the iPad is leaving. That's why they cry now. Because they were on the iPad at breakfast, they were on it in the car, and then the mother takes it away when they go in. Of course the kid's crying. So there's good screen time, there's bad screen time. How about 0 of the bad screen time? But by all means, if you need to put a movie on, while you make dinner, and it's a movie they're going to watch half an hour a day or an hour a day, that's fine.
I'm going to belabor this point, or a point I made earlier for a second, but I'll also just say I totally identify what you're saying because I was on a flight back from California with between my 9 and 6-year-old in the middle seat. My wife sat away from us. It was really, really wonderful. But my daughter watched The Lorax and my son watched A League of Their Own, which is my literal favorite movie. And the discussion with him of how much he liked the movie was like one of the high points of raising children for me. But, just for him to be able to quote Dottie Henson, it was incredible. Anyway, but to go back to this, what we'll often go through is a wellness checklist. And I think this is the key for thinking about what the right balance is. So John talked about good screen time versus bad screen time, this notion that not all screen time is created equal. We'll often go through with parents and we'll say, look, let's go through this checklist. Let's talk about how your kid's sleeping. Are they getting enough sleep, and are screens in any way infringing on that? Then we'll go back to physical activity and moving their body. Then we'll look at their diet and their hydration. Then we'll look at their time spent, face-to-face with friends. Then we'll look at face-to-face family time. Are they involved in at least one extracurricular that involves being with peers, on a team or working collectively, or at least an extracurricular that's expanding their horizons or developing a talent? Are they getting their homework done, and are they going to school? Once we answer most of those questions, kids don't have a ton of time left. What I'll also say is, just going back to the time question, we see a lot of messaging about this. The American Academy of Pediatrics tried to be one of the first in the field to kind of say, here's the amount of time that is okay at each age. And they ended up, going very conservative and trying to say, look, this is the amount. And there was a lot of, outcry from parents around those norms saying, wait a second, this is more than we already spend. We can't possibly do this. I think there's other guidance in the Surgeon General's report during the Biden administration looking at time where, and I think Andrew Probilski over in the UK has done some research on this, looking at a Goldilocks hypothesis, which I know John and I can talk about a little bit. But I'll just say as a talking point, not having screens might be in some way not helping a kid to be aware of the world they might be in. There might be this period somewhere between 0 and 4 hours where, and we're counting kind of all screen-based activity, there's good and bad, absolutely. And then post 3 or 4 hours is pretty much a point of diminishing returns. We know nothing good happens after that point, similar to the common kind of thing about teenagers of nothing really good happens after midnight. Even if they're having core experiences.
But for young kids, it's linear, where if they're 2 hours a day, the kids are doing worse than 1 hour. For young kids, before 5, there's no evidence of benefit of any kind.
Yes, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, when I was in law school, I learned the term, the law is a jealous mistress. And I had a friend also who had a very apt expression. He said, well, the kind of work we're doing here in law school, the work will expand to fill the available time. And I'm not saying that, law stuff was at all as addictive as being on a screen. But, sometimes I think it's very hard to tell a kid do less of something. First of all, they're just very resistant. So I wonder what you think about the approach of trying to minimize the impact of screens on kids by not focusing on screens, but getting them involved in such other activities like sports, like music, like painting, whatever it is, hiking, baking, cooking. I have a kid who's
So
from
you're
a young
talking
age.
really
like-
about getting sort of out of the world, the digital world.
Well,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah, I
sort of
think-
crowd out,
well, that's-
the amount of time that can be spent on a screen with competing activities that
But
are
I think
better.
that's what Dave was saying. Go through a checklist. What's their exercise? What's their reading? What's their time with people? But every single item that Dave mentioned will go down when you give your kid a smartphone and social media, because it will expand like a gas to fill every available moment. And I don't want to exaggerate. It's not true for every kid, but 50% of our kids say that they are online almost all the time. Almost all the time. So these are kids who are constantly back and forth. They're never fully present. And so that's why I say, you can try to crowd it out with these things, and that will help. But how about you just don't give it to them at all until they're 14, and you don't give them social media until they're 16? That is so much better than any effort to regulate it.
We're going to go rogue for a moment because it now says minus 48 seconds on the clock, but we have a young person, so we would love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you.
How old are you?
I'm turning 12 in 10 days, and I
Happy
don't.
birthday.
Thank you. I don't have a phone or an iPad or a computer or anything, and I use my mom's phone for messaging my friends and whatever, and I have Pinterest, and I'm on it. I have a 30-minute limit or something for a day, and I'm not allowed to have screens in my room. I'm just wondering how you navigate not having screens when everyone else has them, because everyone in my class has phones. Even my best friend has it because she goes from school alone. I'm walking to school alone, and I'm gonna probably get an Apple Watch or a flip phone, but not a phone until high school. But how do you navigate it?
Yeah. Well, first, do you think that all your friends who have all these devices, has that been good for them, or do you think it has any bad effects on them?
I think it's helped them connect, but I do know that some of my friends are just on YouTube Shorts all the time. And instead of doing extracurricular activities, I do a lot of things after school, and I'm not just in my room on a screen.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to navigate
Sure.
with other people on screen.
Okay, so first, a lot of your friends are going to basically have nothing to remember about their childhood. They'll have spent their whole childhood basically just scrolling through screens, and you won't. You're actually going to do things. But
This is a real validation of your life right here. We just want to say.
But believe me, I understand the pain of being excluded, the pain of knowing that everyone else is meeting up. And so I would say, are your parents here? Who's here
My
with you?
dad's right there.
Okay. So I would just... So first of all, I would say bravo in keeping it all back. We don't know for sure what the right balance is, but you're doing the right thing. But I would say just keep your eye on how you can use technology so that you can connect with her friends. And so you can text on a computer, you can text on a basic phone. At some point, you should get her a flip phone or a basic phone. I can't say when that is. But at some point, and as I'm saying, you shouldn't have a smartphone until high school. So
we seem to be wading into a family discussion right here, based on the eyebrow raising that just happened from your daughter, sir.
I don't even necessarily want a phone. I don't really have an urge.
Great.
I text my friends a good amount on my mom's phone. I don't Snapchat. It's just kind of there. It's random.
don't
and there's no
don't
point.
get Snapchat. But do find ways that you can use technology to connect with your friends.
Yeah.
You just don't want to give yourself over to a company whose business model is to addict you. But that's
Thank you
All right,
so
thank you.
much, and thank you for the question. Okay, we're now at negative 347. So I want to, first of all, say